Hi everyone, it's Kelly from Kellie's Bead Boutique. So I've been making and teaching how to make jewelry for a very long time. And one of the comments that I always hear is, you make it look so easy. Well, I think it is, and I want to show you just how easy it can be. So I'm going to take some simple parts and some simple techniques and put them together and teach you how to make your very own jewelry. If you want to see what I'm making today, come and join me. Okay, so to make our Gaelic circles, I have two 14-inch pieces of our vegan suede. I also have four 14-inch pieces of our 2mm round leather. And I have some medium-sized textured rings, two small textured rings, two 13mm ribbon ends. I have some small jump rings and a toggle. And for tools, I'm going to be using a ruler, and I've got a clipboard. I also have a pair of sharp scissors. I'm going to need a little bit of Loctite super glue, a Sharpie, and some painter's tape. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is line up all my pieces. So I have two pieces of my round leather, two pieces of my suede, and then two pieces of my round leather. And they don't have to be exactly matched up because we're going to be trimming that off at the end. Then I'm going to take a small piece of painter's tape and I'm going to cover over about the last inch. And it doesn't really matter what it looks like. I just want to have a little bit more grip in here. I find that the painter's tape just helps hold on to that just a little bit better. So now, one of the things you have to remember when you're doing this is that we're never going to be moving this middle piece. The only thing we're going to be doing with this middle piece is putting on rings. You're only ever going to be crisscrossing with the outer and never moving the middle ones. So now I want to start down about 4 inches. I need to leave myself a little bit of room for my braiding. So I'm going to take my ruler, and I know that I'm going to start my first piece down about here somewhere. And again, it doesn't need to be an exact measurement. We have lots of leather here. So the first thing I'm going to do with this is take one of my small rings, and I'm going to pop it onto the center pieces here. So I'll run it up here. And I think the 4-inch mark was somewhere around here. And again, it does not have to be exact. So now I'm going to take my outer right. Now, if you're right-handed, you're going to start with your right. And if you're left-handed, you might want to start with your left. But you're always going to start with your right-hand piece. Or I guess what I'm trying to say is you're always going to start with the same piece. So I'm going to take this right-hand piece and I'm just going to cross it over my middle section. And then I'm going to take my outer piece and I'm going to cross it over that whole section there. So I'm going over top of the one that I brought over and the middle. So now we just basically have like a little crisscross like that. You want to make sure that everything's nice and flat. You don't want to have anything crossed over. Now I'm going to come back and take my middle pieces and run them up through that ring. So you're sort of going back up a bit. So I'm going to try and grab both of those at the same time. And then I'm going to pull up. Now I want to make sure that I am somewhere around the 4-inch mark. So if you want, you can measure that. And I can see that I'm down closer to 5. So I'm going to just scoosh that up a little bit. Bring that up. And now I'm going to tighten all of this up. So I'm going to pull my leather tight. And then I'll pull my suede tight. And I find when I'm pulling my suede, if I kind of hold on to the middle section a little bit, it does help. And don't worry if this is kind of buckling up here, because again, we're going to be cutting off that on the end. So the main thing is to make sure that my leather is nice and tight in the middle, and then we can keep on going. So that's the look that we're going for. And on the back, you can see that it's just looped over this way and crisscrossed behind that middle piece. So now I'm going to move on to the next one. And I'm going to move this up a little bit so I can stay in frame. So I'm going to now switch to one of my larger rings. So I'll pop that on. And I kind of just bring that up. It doesn't matter where it sits because it doesn't really come into play until we've done the crisscrossing. So now I'm going to cross my right one over. And then I'm going to cross my left one over. And then I'm going to bring my center ones back up through my ring. And then pull down. And I can see that these ones have kind of crisscrossed a bit, so I want to make sure before I pull it tight. See, it's crisscrossed in the back, so I'm just going to pop that over that like that. Now what I like to do is I take my ring and I pull it straight up so that it's touching that ring. So now I can pull these tight, and then I pull my suede tight, and you can see how nicely that's locked in there. So let's do that again. I'm just going to move this up a little bit more. So now I'm going to put on my next ring, bring that up to the center, cross my right one over, cross my left one over, and then come back up through the top of that ring and pull down. I love the contrast. You don't have to use contrast if you're choosing your kit. You can do all the same colors, but I like the contrast. I think it looks nice. So now I just need to pull that tight, make sure that this is right next to that ring. And I find it easier if I sort of hold onto the whole thing when I'm pulling down, and then it doesn't want to buckle on me. Okay, so now we're going to put on our fourth ring. So pull that up, bring my center pieces down, cross over, and then bring my center up through the ring. So this one looks so much more complicated than it actually is, which is kind of nice. You want people guessing, you know, how did she do that? Or he, I guess, whoever's making this. Okay. So there we go. And now I'm actually onto my final ring already. So I'll run that up there. And then I'm going to cross that over. So I generally do this in my hand like this. I was trying to keep it on the clipboard for demonstration purposes, but I find it easier to actually do it in my hand. I can keep a little bit better control. It's just that then all you see is my hand. So I wanted to show you how I actually do that. So run this up right next to that one, and then I kind of pull on my suede and then get my leathers all nice and tightened up in there. So just kind of make sure that everything's nicely, you know, you don't have anything crisscrossing over, everything's nice and tight. And there we go, there's our piece, and now we have to start some braiding. Okay, so now I'm just going to start doing a regular 3-strand braid. So I'm always going to start with my right, and I'm going to cross that over the first one, and then I'm going to bring the left over that one. And I want to do it nice and tightly. I mean, I'm not pulling so tight that I'm buckling everything, but I am pulling it nice and taut. You can see that I don't want to have any gaps, and I want to make sure that I'm going straight. If you're not careful, you could end up sort of tipping off a little bit. So I want to keep pulling everything down so that it's nice and tight, nice and neat, no crisscrosses over, and nice and straight. So it just takes a second. It's just, you know, if you've ever done braiding before, there's nothing different. It's just you've got a few more pieces in your hand here. So now this bracelet will make probably a good 8 or 9 inch bracelet if you happen to have a wrist that large. So don't worry about how far down you need to go. I like to go pretty close to the end because I find it easier to keep braiding, and then I've got something to secure. And if you have to come back and actually braid a little tiny nub, it's really hard. So I just kind of keep braiding, and I don't worry about how far I'm actually going. If you were going to be making a whole pile of these, you probably would get to the point where you'd have that figured out. But I just kind of go until I can't go any further. And then I take a little piece of painter's tape, and I'm going to just cover that over. Doesn't matter what it looks like, it's just to hold that braid in there. So I'm going to repeat on the other side. So just make sure everything's locked down, and I'm just going to start my braid. So I'll finish this up, and then I'll show you how to complete this beautiful bracelet. Okay, so you can see that I've done all of my braiding, and I have a little more on one side than on the other, but I think it'll be just fine because we're not going to be using the full length of this. So one of the questions that I get asked all the time is, how do I measure for bracelets? Now, of course, every bracelet is going to be a little bit different, but I'm going to do my best to explain how I come up with my measurements on this particular one, and hopefully you can apply that to other bracelets. So the first thing that you have to take into account when you're coming up with your bracelets and the sizing is your wrist size. So you want to just take a tape measure and just go around your wrist and give sort of a loose, not a like bulky loose, but just kind of, you don't want it super tight. So let's say that my wrist is 7 inches. So I then want to make a 7-inch bracelet, maybe plus a little tiny bit for some comfort. So you then have to take into account your endings. So the way that I'm finishing this piece off is with these ribbon ends. So this distance between here and here is almost 1.5 inches, just shy of 1.5 inches. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of math. So if I have a 7-inch wrist, I want to make a 7-inch bracelet. I have to deduct 1.5 inches. So we're going to do a 5.5-inch length here, and then I'll be adding this, which will come up to my 7 inches. So what I have to do is find the halfway point between 5.5 inches, because we've got 5.5 plus 1.5 equals my total of 7. So half of 5.5 is 2.75. And believe me, I am no good at math, so I actually have to really think this out. So what I'm going to do is find the center point, which is where this crisscrosses right here. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that on the 2.75 inch mark on my ruler. So I always double check. I make sure that's my middle one. I place it right there on the middle. Then I'm going to take my Sharpie and I'm going to go down to where it says 5.5, which is right here. And I'm going to go just slightly above that because I don't want a tight wrist. So I mean, I'm not even going to the next. I'm sort of going between the 5.5 and whatever this next one is, the 1/16 of an inch. So just a tiny little bit. So again, I always measure twice, so I want to make sure I'm on the 2.75 and I'm going up to 5.5. So I find it easier to double check a bunch of times, and then I don't have to worry if I'm in the wrong place. So now I'm just going to run my Sharpie down here, and you won't even see those marks after we cut it because we're going to be covering them over with the ribbon ends. Then I'm going to flip it around and do the same. So I find that middle section, go to the 2.75, and I go up to 5.5 and just have another little double check there, and I come across. Now if you're doing this on black leather, you might have to find a white or a yellow Sharpie or something like that, or maybe you're just really good at eyeballing it. Okay, so now before I get started here on my cutting, I want to make sure that I have everything ready. I want to have a pair of sharp scissors, I want to have my chain nose pliers, and I want to have my ribbon ends, because you're only going to really get one kick at the can to do this, and you don't want it to fall apart. So here's my cutting line. So I'm going to take a pair of sharp scissors and I'm going to place my thumbnail right on the other side there. And I'm going to bravely cut that. And now I don't want this to come apart, so I'm going to hold it nice and tight in between my fingers, and I'm going to place my ribbon end on. And I just sort of gather it all in there, and I make sure that nothing's coming out the end. So if it is, I just sort of stuff it back in and I start to close it. So close, stuff, close, stuff. I just sort of keep doing it. I am going to work a little bit on the other end to make sure nothing pops out there. Sorry, I have to have my fingers in there because I don't want this to come apart. But so far that's what we've got. You can see that one trying to sneak out there. It's because I'm demoing what to do there. So I'm just going to close that up. So before I give it my final smushes, I make sure that everything's in there. So I'm just going to use my tools, push that in there nice and snug. This end I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to push that in there with my tools. And then now I'm going to come right over the top of the whole thing and give it some nice final smushes. And I want to make sure that it looks nice and neat. And you can get pretty aggressive on the end here. I don't mind them when they're closed right up, and then I know nothing's going to go anywhere. And you see how that just kind of gets that in there nice and tight. So I'm going to repeat on the other end. So this one's a little harder to see because my marks went right across. There was no blue that it went across, so it took me a second to find it, but it's right there. So again, I'm just going to come straight across, holding that with my fingers, and I'm going to take my ribbon end and get that on the end. So I just kind of sandwich it all like this so that it's not going anywhere, and you can kind of boss it around and start to close them up and just close and tuck. And just keep adjusting as you go along. And then I kind of take it before I finish it up and give it another little push down. You just don't want these ends to pop out at all. So I just kind of, push my fibers along. Okay, now I'm going to come over top and give that a good smush. You don't want to push up here. And I can see that some of the suede is sort of showing a little bit up in the hole, but you won't notice that later. So give that some nice good squooshes. That's being the technical term. All right, so that does look like a pretty small bracelet, but once we get all of our toggle and jump rings on there, it'll be just the perfect size. So all I have to do is attach my toggle. So I've got 4 jump rings. And if you've watched my videos before, you know that I always use heavy small jump rings. And when I'm putting them on, when I'm putting on a toggle, I should say, I always start with the round end first, and I just put 1 jump ring through that, and then do that up nice and tight. And then on the other end, I want to put 3 of my jump rings. 1 to add a little bit of length. Do that up nice and tight. The second one is to reorient everything so that it's in the right direction. And do that up nice and tight. And if it kind of gets stuck, just kind of force it there until it kind of clicks in. And then the final one is to put the bar part of the toggle on. Now, the reason that I do this, and I'll show you in a second, is if you don't, what you're going to have a hard time with is getting the toggle bar up through the loop of the toggle. So if you make a bracelet and you're finding that you just can't, like sometimes you'll go to get it up and you get it like this far and it just won't go, it's because you don't have enough length there. So by adding those extra jump rings, it now pops up there nice and easily. So you see how it gives you a really, really nice finish. Okay, so the last step I'm going to do is just a little bit of security because I don't want to worry about things. So I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite glue. The reason that I'm using this one is because it's a gel and I can get it where I want it. You could probably use GS Hypo, I guess, if that's all you've got. But I'm just going to take a little bead of it and I'm going to run it on either side. And I'm just putting a little bit on either side here, just so that if by chance those should start to wiggle out at all, they will get stopped by the glue. So I'm not putting a lot, I'm just putting enough to create just a little bit of a barrier there. And this Loctite is really, it's like a super glue, but it's a gel form. If you get any of it on your fingers, immediately wipe it off before you touch your leather because it will get stuck on your leather. So there you go, there's our Gaelic circles. Now I'm not going to win any awards for hand model, but I wanted you to see how really beautiful these are on. I absolutely love this one and I think you guys are going to really have fun choosing your own colors. Now if you want to know the colors of these, I'll let you know because a lot of people ask me what colors I've used in the pieces. So this is the dark gray with our natural gray leather and of course the antique brass. And this is the dark turquoise with the antique brown and the copper. So these will be fully customizable. You'll be able to pick out whatever colors you like. The link will be in the description box below and it'll take you directly to my website. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give me a like, leave me a comment, and please subscribe to my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video. I loved making this one. I want to thank you so much for watching and I will see you on the next one.